only thing we have to fear is
In war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live, and it's Friday, which means it's Good News Friday. We're going to bring you some good news from around the nation. I'm Rick Green. I'm here with Tim Barton and David Barton. Guys, looking forward to today. Where do you want to start with some good news?
I'm going to start with the national poll that's out, and it's an interesting poll on the heels of what has happened with the second shooting at Fort Hood, which is now kind of simmered down some. On the basis of that event, that tragic event at Fort Hood, there have been a lot of folks saying, hey, you know, Bill Clinton is the one that, as he left office, he's the guy who instituted the ban on guns on military bases. So this is a recent policy. Why not reverse it? How did we go for 200 years before that allowing guns on military bases, and suddenly we decided in the very last months of Bill Clinton to ban guns on military bases? How's that been a good deal? So there's been some motion on that and people talking about that. We were just in Congress talking to members of Congress who were looking at that. There's all sorts of alternatives. A bunch of military guys in Congress said, you know, at least you ought to have the upper level NCOs and all the officers wearing guns. And you ought to have one person wearing a gun in every building on the base. Because if somebody, I mean, it was real evident from this last time that when that shooter, when the MP drew the gun, he shot himself. So had the gun been visible earlier, the likelihood of someone having come in and done what they did is diminished greatly. So there's all sorts of talk about it, but in association with that, it drives another call for control of guns. It drives another call for, hey, we got to register guns. We got to get these guns out of the hands of people, etc. And so I'm holding in my hands a large survey that was just finished by policeone.com, POLICEONE.com. So these are all police folks. The survey just finished has nearly 16,000 responses, which puts your margin of error way down really low. Normal polling is 400, 500, 600 people. This is 16,000. And so you look at these guys, and you have 76 of them who are currently law enforcement. 76% are currently law enforcement officers. They're really split from 18% of these guys are in tiny departments of 1 to 25, and 19% are in departments with 1,000 or more. I mean, just across the board, it's pretty evenly split on how these guys are and who's officers and who's chiefs and who's captains and who's commanders. And so out of 16,000, you just get a whole lot of guys that are involved in law enforcement. And so they were asked all sorts of interesting questions. And let me just throw out some of the interesting questions that they were asked and how the law enforcement guys, and the reason I think this is significant is when you ask somebody who does this for a living as opposed to, if you ask somebody who plays for the Texas Rangers full-time how to bat as opposed to somebody who has a kid in T-ball, you're going to get better instruction from the guys who does it for a living than the guy who does it for a hobby with a kid. And so this notion of our legislators know best about what we need for guns or whatever. No, the guys who handle these all the time. So the question was asked, do you think a federal ban on manufacture and sale of ammunition magazines that hold more than 10 rounds would reduce violent crime? Law enforcement people, with a margin of 96% to 4%, said no, it will not reduce crime. Now, when 96%...
So that's a real toss-up.
Yeah, that's right.
That could go either way.
That's right.
Yeah, it could go either way.
Here's another one. Do you think that a federal law prohibiting private, non-dealer transfer of firearms between individuals would reduce violence? This is a gun show thing. Close that gun hole loop. Will that reduce violent crime? 80% of cops say no, it will not reduce violent crime. Then what effect do you think the passage of the White House current proposed legislation would have in improving police officer safety? So if the White House gets all of its gun control stuff through, what do you think it'll make any difference at all? Well, 61% say it won't make any difference, but 25% say it will make a negative difference. So you're looking at 86% that says it'll have no effect or it'll have a negative effect. These are cops.
So if you pass more laws, it won't make the lawbreakers obey them?
Man,
Wait a second. Wait a second.
I can't believe. And by the way, maybe I don't need to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. When you're talking 96%, you're talking Democrats and Republicans. There's no way that 96% of all cops are Republicans or conservative or anything else, not by a long shot. So we've got those numbers. Let me pull some others out of this one. Do you support the concept of a national database tracking all legal gun sales? Only 23% said yes. So we're 77 on the other side of yes. How big a problem do you think gun crime is in your jurisdiction? Now, you're asking cops how big a problem gun crime is, because all this legislation is targeted at fixing gun crime. Only 16% said there was even significant issue in their jurisdiction.
It would be interesting to note, too, where those guys are from. Because if they're from Chicago,
that's right,
it would be different
that's
than if they're from
right there.
Fort Worth, Texas.
Now, grab this. If you were a sheriff or a chief of police, how would you respond to more restrictive gun laws? 45% of these guys say, I would not enforce them, and I would join in public vocal opposition against those laws. And 17% say, well, I wouldn't enforce them. I would quietly lead opposition. But what you're looking at is about 2/3 of all these police officers said, if you pass more restrictive gun laws, we're not going to enforce them. So that's pretty significant stuff.
This is some great news on Friday. I'm feeling better about this right now.
I'm feeling a whole lot better about the opinions of not only we the people, but these law enforcement guys clearly get it.
I mean, this is clearly not partisan. Here's another one. What is your opinion of some law enforcement leaders' public statements that they would not enforce more restrictive gun laws? So, a gun law comes out and the sheriff says, I'm not going to enforce it. What's your opinion of them? Those who said they have a favorable opinion, 70% of cops said, I've got a favorable opinion of any guy who says he won't enforce more restrictive gun. I could keep going. I'll give you one more. Here's one. Do you believe gun buybacks or gun turn-in programs have been effective in reducing the level of gun violence? 11% yes. So you're looking at 89% that didn't think so.
Just when I was worried about the intelligence of the American people, it's getting better. Hey, as we go to break, I got to leave you a quote from First Lieutenant Patrick Cook. He's one of the soldiers that was at Fort Hood. That was it was a traumatic experience. He literally had to have a friend die in his arms, and he had to cower down on the ground because he didn't have his weapon for which he was trained and had a concealed handgun license but couldn't carry it on base. Listen to what he said. He said, this will happen again and again until we learn the lesson that suppressing the bearing of arms doesn't prevent horrific crimes, it invites them. Lieutenant Patrick Cook, Fort Hood shooting survivor, and man, Lieutenant, I'm sorry you had to go through what you had to go through.
Yeah.
Let's get some people in office that will change that. Back in a moment here on WallBuilders Live.
Hey guys, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders, and I know you hear my dad and Rick talk a lot about our founding fathers, about the original intent of our nation, the constitutional heritage that we have, and really we've seen how far we've slipped away from that. And I know a lot of us, as we hear my dad and Rick talk, think, I wish there was a place that I could go and I could see these documents, and I could read and learn about the founding fathers firsthand, see the things they did. And I want to give you some websites today that can help you accomplish that very thing. If you get online, you can go to places like Library of Congress, and you can look under their Century of Lawmaking or historical documents. You can go to the Avalon Project, to the Founders Constitution, to Google Books, or even the Internet Archives, or you can just go to WallBuilders' website. We have a section for our library, and under that section we have different subgroups for historical documents, historical writings, even a place where you can get helpful links to find out more information about other websites where you can do research for yourself and find the truth for yourself. Friends, this is the time that we need to know who we are and where we came from. WallBuilders.com is a great place to go.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. It's Good News Friday, and as we were talking in the last segment, guys, one of the things I love about being an American is that even when tragedy strikes, we have great reminders of how great our people are and how great the principles are. So your polling that you shared with us, David, tells me there's hope to change these crazy policies that allow for those tragedies like what happened at Fort Hood. And we get some common sense back into our government. So let's get into some more good news, guys. What's next?
Well, we're going to Georgia, and speaking of policies that change some of the terrible events, in Georgia, it had been against federal law to carry a firearm inside a church. One of the many things that people that have a concealed or a carry permit know is that there are certain buildings that are supposed to be off limits for multiple reasons, but churches was one of those places that was considered off limits. Well, Georgia decided that this is rather ridiculous. Churches are private property. And in Texas, we have kind of the same scenario where you can carry on a church, but you have to have the church's approval. The church has to allow that to happen. Well, in Georgia, they finally decided that's what they're going to do. So they passed a law to allow people to carry in church. And the only kind of caveat is the church does have to opt in. But here's the great news. It used to be if someone got caught carrying in church that they could get a $1,000 fine and spend up to a year in prison for carrying in church. Now, if the church chooses not to opt in, then the most that can happen is a $100 fine for carrying in church, which is a huge cutback. So Georgia is finally recognizing, we don't want to leave more places that are unprotected, where people can come in with firearms, where they can come do damage. We want people protected, and it's great that this is happening now in churches.
Hey, I'd gladly pay that $100 fine to be able to carry and defend my family and fellow churchgoers. Hey, who was the guy, David? Do you remember the pastor? I think it was in Kansas that had an article out. We covered it on Good News Friday a year or two ago, where he was saying, these churches. There's been all these shootings in these churches. And he realized, wait a minute, I'm the one up in the pulpit. I can see it before anybody else because I can see everybody out there and people coming through the doors. And so he started carrying in his own church for that very reason and encouraged the people in his church to carry. Well, there's a lot
of churches doing that. I could sit here and start rattling off a bunch of our WallBuilders Live guests that have done that, but I'm not going to tip the bad guys off as to who's carrying. Just go visit some churches and see what happens.
And I can tell you one of the fun things about some of those churches, and when you visit afterwards, someone says, so hey, are you carrying? You go, yeah. And then you and the deacons and the elders all are discussing, and everybody pulls out their piece, and everybody's comparing pieces. That's a fun church to speak at.
That's right.
That's when you have a fight over who gets to take the bad guy out first. That's the right kind of problem.
And those are the churches that don't have problems. Because,
yeah, that's right.
Had it not been for that lady being armed in New Life Church a few years ago, that guy would have kept shooting people and just gone right down what he was doing. But she was armed. She took somebody down. And that's been the lessons. If you have an Amish school that doesn't have that, you can shoot till you want to stop. So it's a different issue.
And that's one of the things with this law. At the time, the lady in New Life in Colorado you're referring to, she was an off-duty police officer, and so legally she was the only one that could carry at that time up in Colorado. And so this was a significant deal where, just like the Fort Hood situation, when people cannot carry and cannot defend themselves, a lot more tragedies, a lot more loss of life happens until someone who is legally authorized to carry can show up. And this is where if we arm the people, where there are more guns, there is less crime.
And that's across the world. We've seen that in nation after nation. We see that in country after country. We see that in county after county, in state after state, and in city after city. I mean, we talked recently even how the police chief in Detroit is now saying he wants people carrying guns to make Detroit safer.
Well, and let me just throw in too, as we're promoting guns, obviously it's because we understand guns are not the problem. When you look at what happened in Pennsylvania, where a kid took 2 kitchen knives and just went after kids in the hallway, and 20 kids suffered wounds because of these kitchen knives. What we've identified many times, the problem is not what's in somebody's hand, it's what's in their heart. And so as we identify guns are not the problem, well, we're not saying that bad things don't happen with guns, but it's understanding that guns are not the cause of the bad things. It's what's in somebody's heart. So if you really want to solve the problems, you got to start reaching people's heart, because if the heart's not in the right place, they'll find a knife, they'll find a hammer, they'll find a baseball bat, they'll find a gun. Guns are not the issue, but when someone shows up with a gun, the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
Well, that's one thing for sure. The heart is the issue, but as founding father James Iredell pointed out, sometimes the terror of punishment is the issue. And if you're a bully and you see that I've got a baseball bat strapped on my back, you're likely not going to pick on me as the guy you want to beat up. You're going to find somebody who doesn't have a baseball bat strapped to their back. And so that's the other issue. If we can do the heart side, if we can teach the morality and the religious principles necessary to teach internal controls, internal restraints, that's good. But if you can't do that, I'll just use flat fear on the outside, and you don't want to mess with me.
Speak softly and carry a big stick?
That'll do it.
Hey, and I'll throw out one other problem, and that is the psychotropic drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, even this guy at Fort Hood, again, on one of these psychotropic drugs. Virtually every mass shooting, the shooter has been on one of these psychotropic. Nobody wants to, to connect those dots, but it's absolutely there. We need to be looking into it. But all of these things that we've just discussed, none of those things are solved by taking guns away from the good guys. All of those things are stopped in their tracks, and at least the damage is limited when the good guys do have the guns, as you said, Tim, so that they can stop the bad guy in that case. And like you said, the knives, I mean, look in China, they've had a rash of these same type of things happening. In fact, on the same day as Sandy Hook, there was a crazy guy in China that went through a school and hurt or killed 20-some-odd kids. So
with knives.
No question,
Obviously
it's not the inanimate
guns,
object.
totally knives. And, if I get ticked at somebody, I can kill them with a can of green beans. It ain't what's happened. It's not what's in my hand, it's what's in my heart. So I will find a way. Cain did that to Abel long ago before they ever had guns. It's what's in your heart, it's not what's in your hand.
Yeah, no doubt. Got to take a quick break, guys. We'll come back and get some more good news. Stay with us here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. The key to a self-governing nation is self-governing people, and the key to personal self-government is to live by the standards in God's Word. If someone cannot control himself by those standards, then our Constitution certainly will be unable to restrain him. Understanding this, John Adams declared, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Greed, ambition, revenge, or seduction would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." John Adams believed that successful government rested not upon our great Constitution, but rather upon moral and religious people.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. It's Friday, Good News Friday. We're bringing you some good news from around the nation. Guys, what's next on our list?
Well, I'm going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. The court is kind of winding down its term for this year. It'll be over in June.
That is good news.
Yeah, that was my good news, Rick. The Supreme Court's winding down its term. So
easy enough. I'm happy when the legislators aren't in town. We're much more safe then. I'm happy when the Supreme Court's not in town.
Well, in this one, they actually got a good decision that came out recently. It's called McCutcheon versus FEC, and it goes back to the McCain-Feingold law. If you remember when that law was passed, all of us knew it was unconstitutional, and we called on President Bush to veto it, and he signed it because he knew the Supreme Court was going to strike it down. Well, the Supreme Court didn't strike it down, and it has been such a burden on free speech since then. And the courts have been whittling away little by little, but what they did was they really put a knife in a major part of the heart, or at least slashed an artery here by this decision on McCutcheon versus FEC. Because what they've done is they said, this arbitrary amount that you can only give a certain amount to a candidate, and you can only limit to how many times you can give to a candidate. Look, I can express my free speech by my contributions or where I don't put my contributions. That's why we have boycotts. That's why things happen. I can choose to put my money where I want to unless the federal government gets involved and says, well, you can only put so much here and so much here. And so what has happened is a result of this McCain-Feingold law, which puts a limit on the number of contributions you can make, the size of those contributions, frequency of those contributions, and even how much you can get to a political party. What the law allowed was these 527 kind of super PACs. And so what had happened, these super PACs have grown up, and that is really, McCain-Feingold said, we're going to get the money out of politics. Really? Then how come this last presidential election is the most money spent by far, $1 billion, essentially spent in this thing? So it didn't get money out, but what it did was it empowered super PACs. And I've already been talking with a number of guys who are going to be running for president this year, and under the laws that existed, they can get all these contributions, $50, $100 million contributions from people in $2,500 or $2,600 bites. That's all you're allowed to give. But what they were having to do is they were having to go find a billionaire sponsor. They needed a billionaire sponsor who would do a super PAC that would be willing to put $200 to $300 million into the super PAC. So you can have a bunch of small donors, but you got to have a big donor kind of sugar daddy person that'll give you all the money you need for your race. And this notion about getting money out of politics, it doesn't do that. But what it's done now is the Supreme Court having struck all that down and now puts money back into the people's hands. They can do what they want. If you don't like somebody getting $500,000 from David Barton, it's going to be posted, and you can say, I'm not going to vote for him because Barton gave him money. But instead of saying, well, we, the government, will tell you how much you can give, now we just notify how much has been given, and voters will make their own decision of whether they think someone's been bought or not. But in the meantime, you can give money, and that's really, really, really good news for getting the federal government out of this, getting free speech back into it, and getting individual choice as a part of it.
And just to follow up, so that I know if I was not as familiar with the situation and just sharing that, as a listener, I would be concerned going, wait a second, that means someone can come in and buy all this airtime and win an election. And I would just point back to Ted Cruz as a great example. He was a guy who only had a fraction of the money to run, but the people were behind him. And so having more money does not automatically win an election. It really is where the people are and what the people are looking for and what they want. Ted Cruz winning in Texas was a result of the Tea Party, the base, the Christian conservatives getting behind and going, we want somebody that's going to stand for the right values. It wasn't the money that won the election. It was the people that won the election.
That's right. And the good news about this is generally one of the things you'll always find with the winners is they have a broad base of contributions. They don't get just 2 or 3 or 4 people sponsoring them. They will have thousands of donors, and that's always a healthy thing. And this allows those thousands of donors to have a bigger impact than it did, because even though we were having thousands of donors, you were still having to go find one person to really fund your race, and nobody wants that. Let the people fund it. If the people don't fund it, that's great. If they do, that's great. But let it be back in the hands of the people, not in the hands of the federal government.
One more break. We'll come back with some more good news here on WallBuilders Live. Red, White, Blue, and Green is a new reality show following the Green family around the nation, rediscovering the American principles that made us the most successful nation in the history of the world. You can be a part of launching this new reality series by visiting rickgreen.com and clicking on the Red, White, Blue, and Green tab. Here's a sneak peek from the pilot episode. Rick Green coming to you live from the Lone Star State of Texas, a beacon of hope and freedom to liberty lovers around the world. Today I'm thinking about why do we do what we do? Because everywhere we go as a family, when we're traveling and speaking, someone comes up to us and asks, where's the hope? Is it over for America? They genuinely feel like the stars and stripes are fading. I felt that. But when I look at my family, whether it's my son Trey and his drive to exceed expectations, or Reagan and his love for serving and teaching other people, Cameron and her determination to outperform her brothers in everything she does, or my little stagehound Rhett and his boundless enthusiasm. Through their eyes, I see a vibrant nation. When my children stand in the birthplace of the Constitution, or on battlefields where patriots gave their lives, I can see in them a rekindled flame of the American spirit. The future of my children's country is bright because it's built on the foundation of an incredible providential history, a history of patriots and pastors, entrepreneurs and freedom fighters, mothers, fathers, families like yours and mine, who chose to live like their nation depended on it. And it still does. So when people ask us, where is the hope? We tell them, it's in you. Each of us, every individual, every family, has a duty to fight for freedom and add our voice, our color, to the American dream. For our family, it's red, white, and blue, and a little bit of green. To learn more about Red, White, Blue, and Green, visit rickgreen.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
We're back on WallBuilders Live for some more good news. Just a few minutes left, guys. What do we want to go to?
We're going to go to Delaware, and the Delaware Supreme Court had a unanimous decision just very recently that said that people that were in government housing did not have to give up their Second Amendment rights just because in government housing. Up in Delaware, and actually I believe it's this way in many states, if you are in government housing, then the government's able to regulate what you can and can't do in their housing and what they provide. And one of the provisions was that people could not have a firearm for self-defense, for the family, for their property. They could not have any kind of firearm in government housing. Well, that was a case that was brought before the court, appealed all the way up before the Delaware Supreme Court, and they unanimously ruled. And here's one of the things that the state of Delaware said they accept. A person has the right to keep and bear arms for the defense of self, family, home, and state, and for hunting and recreational use. And just because you're in government housing, you do not lose that right as an individual. So bravo to Delaware for getting this one right.
Hey, while we're in Delaware, guys, this is a little out of character here, I'm going to throw some good news in here as well. A judge there in Delaware stopped an unconstitutional law Delaware had passed that was going to require our friends at Delaware Strong Families, Nicole Tice, and the folks that are doing Patriot Academy out there and Family Policy Council. They were going to require them to reveal all their donors and in order to do voter guides. And so fortunately a judge stopped that and said, no, you guys can't do that because of political retribution. You guys know how it is in the Northeast and some of these areas, especially in Delaware, where conservatives are so few in numbers. They really go after them when they expose some of these liberal votes. So another great decision out of Delaware there.
And here's one out of Texas. We'll close down today with Texas. It's a good way to start, a good way to close. Texas has the pro-life law we passed said if you're an abortion clinic and you don't have admitting privileges to hospitals, you can't operate. And the reason is we've had 400 women die in, quote, legal abortions. So they will end up bleeding to death because they can't get them in the hospital. So Texas said, look, 400 deaths, that's more than enough, 400 more than should have been. If you don't have admitting privileges to a local hospital, you cannot operate an abortion clinic. And so many local hospitals refuse to have these abortion clinics because they really are just abortion mills. One of the things we used to say was we want women to have the same protection that veterinarians give horses, and we weren't at that level. I mean, women were treated sub-animal because they don't get the same medical protection. So as a result of this law having gone into place, it has shut down 13 abortion clinics in Texas. It's gone from 32 abortion clinics down to 19 because hospitals will not allow them to admit someone.
And that was, by the way, appealed by Planned Parenthood, that the organization that loves and cares about women, for the defense of women. That's why they wanted lower standards in health for women.
Yeah, exactly. So good news is that Texas law has now had a huge impact in raising health for women.
And going to see more of it around the country. It's one of the areas we're winning on so many different levels. Lots of great news today. Thanks for sharing, guys. Thank you for listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided forever.